I really don't know what I'm going to talk about. I've got, what I really enjoy doing a lot these days is just getting people's questions and concerns and what's coming up, and then, because when I get those, I get a sense of where they're coming from, and I know who I'm talking to. I think part of what I understood from your instructions was to give you a little bit of my history with the organization, but the history you've heard make mine seem really, there's nothing impressive with that, so I can talk about that. And if we get through that and there's nothing else to talk about, I actually have a list of topics here, which is called 43210 topics that interest me. 4 is 4 motivations that come into meditation. I haven't heard many people talk about those. And there's a third one in there that's really important that gets overlooked, so that's a fun topic. 3 is 3 attunement practices. We've got the 6 R's. We have what I call the essential practices, which is the first 3 of the 4 noble truths. And then there's kind of a non-dual welcoming that's really powerful for me now. I'd like to talk about that. 2 kinds of objects, 432 if you get this. There are tangible objects and there are intangible objects. And the intangible objects take you a lot deeper if you don't fall out of the gondola. I mean, they're very sensitive, but because of the sensitivity, it's very easy to get distracted. The 1 is non-dual awareness, and 0 is enlightenment. It's just nothing. So,
maybe you can give us a sense of what you're doing these days with TWIM, with students.
Okay.
What are you up to?
Okay, what am I up to? It's got a little bit of a history behind it, so I can go back with that a little bit. I was introduced to Bonte secondhand or third hand by John Travis, who had been my main teacher for a long time. And part of the reason that he recommended Bonte was that I was going into jhanas. And jhanas are very familiar with those, but he's not used to teaching them. And so he said, well, there's this guy out there, Bonte Vimalaramsi, who does this. And in fact, Bonte was traveling to Northern California, and so he gave me the contact, and I called, and I got an interview with him. And when I sat down with him, Bonte started asking me these questions about, are you familiar with this in your practice? What about this? What about this? And there was, oh, yes, 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 no. And he said, okay, this is what you do in your practice. And so I went back and did that in my practice, and something just clicked on. So I called him back immediately and came out here for a retreat. And my experience with Bonte was he was always just like about 2 steps ahead of me. I would talk about something and he would say, well, do this. Okay. And I would go back and I'd work on it. And I'd get 3 or 4 steps down the road, and I'd come back and I would report that to them. And he was 2 steps ahead of me. Just over and over and over, you know, for many, many years. And so I was coming out here often for retreats. And then I came into a retreat once. This was about the time when Bonte really got into forgiveness. And all I can say was I went on that retreat and he decided to put me on forgiveness. And I've worked with the forgiveness for a lot, and I didn't feel like that was really going to the essence of what was there. but he's the teacher, and so I had this history of arguing with him, one-on-one. And he was very good about it because it felt like he just had a lot to offer. But there were all these places that were just kind of a little bit, from my perspective, kooky. And I knew that if he was going to be a good teacher for me, I really had to get that stuff out. And he was remarkable with all that. He would come right back then. He was there, and it was really, really helpful. He only nailed me for it once, and I deserved it. I was used to questioning his stuff in the interviews, and there was the end of a talk, and there was some question and answers, and I got into one of those, and he just flattened me. And I thought, okay, that's right, you know. One-on-one private's one thing. What you do in public, something that feels like it's dishonoring a teacher, is really not the way to go. So that all was fine. And then I got out to this one retreat, and at the end of the retreat, or when I came into the retreat, he was not 2 steps ahead of me. And he put me on forgiveness as I said, and I told him, you know, I understand the power of forgiveness, etc., but it didn't feel quite right to me. But he was insistent, and so, okay, he's the teacher, I would do that. And I came out of that retreat basically where I came in. And it felt like there'd been nothing that had been helpful. But, I mean, I've been coming for, I don't know, 5 or 10 years at that point, and so, get a bad retreat. Well, the next 2 retreats were the same story. And I just wasn't getting much out of it, and as I was flying home, I realized I could have done more just on a retreat by myself. And so I backed out and I stopped coming. And it was within 6 months of that I began to get stories coming back about Bonte mentally failing. And that all rang true for me. It's like I just feel like I picked up the beginning edge of that, and within 6 months he was starting to degenerate, and I felt bad for him, but I wasn't coming. So in the meantime, I think it was before. No, it was a couple of years before. I was a minister of a relatively large Unitarian Universalist congregation in Sacramento, and it was more than a full-time job. And it was during the midst of that I started coming out here. And so when he was going downhill, I just stopped coming. And goodwill to everyone, goodwill especially to Bonte. But I was still paying attention to what was going on out here, and I was really quietly at first impressed by the response to the community. That because I think the easiest thing to do would be to get another, heavy hitter, big teacher to come in and take over that role. But instead, as I mentioned earlier, it felt like you guys were really trying to see what it would be like to move to a different model, build up a collective, including training teachers and all that sort of business. And for what I could see long distance, it was really working. And I know it's a complicated thing and it takes a long time to do, but I was very impressed with it. So there's enough time that's gone by that I really wanted to get back out here on the ground and see what was going on, and possibly connect back in whatever ways. And so in the meantime, I had backed out of the ministry, but I was still teaching like crazy. And I look back, it's like even 5 years ago, I was doing at least one all-day retreat a month, one or two 10-day to 2-week retreats, seeing probably 15 or 20 private, some therapy clients, more and more, and it shifted over the years, mentoring meditators. But the last couple of years, when I look at all that stuff that I was doing, I'm just tired thinking about it. So I know my energy was running down. And so I started to back out of it all. And time for me to retire. And that just didn't feel right. And I realized it's a whole business of retiring. It's not a matter of what you do in sort of a black or white, but to try to titrate the volume of what I'm doing, so that I was still helpful to people and it was still supportive of me, but it left more room for me to get sleep and restoration and the stuff that I needed. And then along the way, somewhere in there, Delson and I connected a little bit and started looking at stuff we might do together. So that's in the mix at the moment as well.
Great. That's interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
Where do you see TWIM going? Where do you see, this kind of movement headed? Where do you see it, or where do you think it should go? What's your thoughts about it?
That's a great question. And I have some great thoughts about it, but whether I could remember them all, we'll see. Like I said, I've really been impressed with the collective model that you seem to be developing. And I know I've worked with big organizations and not exactly this configuration, but I know how complicated that can be. And from my perspective, it's working. And I think that the issues you're raising are really tricky. It's like, how do you train people? And at the same time, how do you hold people accountable? And what does holding people accountable look like? But if you don't have the balance, of those things, then it's going to go off one place or another. So the fact that you struggled with this and you had this crazy guy, I think that was great, actually, because if things just go along smoothly, you know it's going to blow up at some point, and so you need some practice with it, and so that's great. The other thing about where I see it going, and this would be an interesting one to talk about, is it feels like a little sinful to say this, but what are the limitations of TWIM? And there are certainly, that's where my title of Beyond the Jhanas. The jhanas, I think, are a remarkably clear and effective path, but it's just a path. And I get some people, and I think some of you have probably seen them, somebody comes in with very little experience on this stuff, and they're just out there, and balanced, etc. And there are other people that are just out there in a different way, and that's a different kind of problem. But there are lots of different ways that people can go through this. And I think that the more open and facile we can be with different kinds of practices. And there's a lot of stuff so I think many of us, maybe even all of us here, have had the experience of the mind getting quieter and quieter and quieter, and then just, I call it winking out. It's just gone. And as I first started experiencing that, that was wonderful sign of things are going well, etc. And as I keep on relaxing into and watch it, what I thought was completely silent wasn't. And if you think about it a little bit, we've got, 89 billion neurons. And when you go into Nirodha or Nibbana, it's not like the whole system turns off and goes blank. And so at the very least, it would make sense that there's some static back there behind it. And to work with that, this is something where I'm really interested in it, and it seems to go off way far out into left field someplace. And in talking with some people here too, what I hear is going through with the way most of you are practicing, if I'm hearing this right, is that you get beyond the point of where you're trying to stabilize things, and to the point where the only question is, what's going on? What's going on? And if you're sitting and there's a little bit of background noise, and you're thinking, okay, what can I do to get rid of that? Well, that's aversion. That, big time. I'm just letting that stuff be there. I told some of you this story, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but last summer out in Sacramento, it was getting over 105, about 4 out of 5 days. And I had one day where suddenly I had nothing scheduled for that day, which is very unusual for me. So I decided, well, maybe I'll go up to the gym and work out. And so I went up to the gym and I did some weightlifting and stuff, and then I got on one of the stationary bicycles, and I just realized, wait a minute, I've been looking for a day that I could just go off and meditate for the whole day, and this was it. What am I doing, And so maybe I'll go home and meditate. But that seemed kind of silly. Well, let's just see what happens if I can meditate on this bicycle. So I'm there pedaling away and doing that, and there are weights in the background that are clanging, and there are people that are talking here, and there's all this ruckus that's going on. And I realize there's no way I'm going to get my mind to go quiet, but I want to stay here and we'll just see what happens. And so I stopped trying, and I just let it be what it was. And in 20 minutes, my mind was just like silk. And I realized that I've, been preaching to people about, letting go and relax and stuff. But I've got some habitual tendencies that are just so wired in there that I can't even see them. When that kind of quiet comes in, it gets really interesting in a way that I'm not even sure I know how to describe anymore, but that I'm convinced that there's a leading edge to all this. And let me bring another piece into it. I was talking at lunch with some people. Progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. Anybody familiar with that? Gyasmo Rinpoche, yeah. So he was a Tibetan, and he was talking about, the high end of meditation in the three main branches of Buddhism and what those practices were, and describing them and how they operate. And as I read through it, it sounded to me like there's only 2 or 3 different practices, and the difference between the others were a matter of language and syntax and stuff like that. And the helpful thing that he had in it was that he said there is a certain point of the practice, and I think we're all familiar with this because Bonte talked about it, but I didn't understand the depth and the subtlety of it, where you just stop practicing, that you're actually done with the practice. You may be done for it today, and tomorrow it may be a mess again, and you need all these things again. But what's going on is that his mind gets quieter and quieter and quieter, and it doesn't quiet down completely. And so then there's the question of do you use your practices and techniques and stuff there, or do you just get out of the way? And it's a tricky question because figuring out whether it's time for you to get out of the way or whether it's time to you to do meditation practice more extensively, just figuring that out creates a disturbance in the mind. And I began to recognize that there were states, I don't even want to call them states, there were funny experiences that I would have that meant that I was very close to these. And there are things that probably a lot of you have experienced. One of them is dopamine. You get these little streams of sensation, sometimes going through parts of your body. Another experience would be I would be sitting there and out of nowhere, this quiet chuckle just rose up out of me. There were just lots of things like that. And so what I realized that if I had had one of those experiences, and I, in Presence, was it my 7th book or whatever it was, I tried to make a list of these. I thought there were 2 or 3 of them. I ended up with a list of 24. And what I found is that if I've had one of those experiences in the last half hour, then there's nothing left for me to do. It's just get out of the way. It's just get out of the way. And it's not that the mind will be completely quiet. That was the thing that threw me. But the mind is quieted enough that it knows what to do. And it's just a matter of getting out of the way. So I think a lot of those practices feel similar to what Bonte used to talk about, but they've got some edges on it. And there's a whole thing about the nature of consciousness itself. Maybe I'll leave that out for now. No, I'm thinking of it because I know you've been thinking about it and writing and stuff too, so I'll let you do that part of it. But it's not like the 8th jhana are even flickers into Nirodha necessarily are the end of the line for all this. And it's a different kind of quiet. So I think, as I was saying earlier, the basic practice at that point is you drop all the other practices except for seeing what's going on and what you're experiencing. And if what's going on is very subtle, you don't try to turn the volume up. There's a temptation to do that. You just leave it subtle.
So is it like that emptiness discourse where it's empty of what was there before.
Yes, yeah. That's a good metaphor for it. It's like when you talk about an empty glass. There's actually, a lot of air in it. It's just empty of water.
Yeah.
So there's a familiar substance that's missing, but there is still something there. Thank you. I lost my train of thought. That's one of the gifts of aging.
My question was, you had a statement on your talk, 50 years of dealing with duality.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering what your description of the duality is.
Oh, okay.
And
So the grossest description of it is that duality is when you have opposing forces.
is one.
Duality is when you have opposing forces.
Okay.
But you can be mad as hell at your grandson and love the bejesus out of him. And those seem to conflict, but there's a way in which those conflicting things can just be, there together. And so part of it is that when you feel there's a struggle inside, it's not even resolving the struggle, it's just letting it be and let it dissolve on its own. Yes.
You mentioned being a minister. I did an intro course in Buddhist chaplaincy last year, and it surprised me how explicit they made pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know there was a help with it. To me, it was sort of like they tried to take Buddhism and shove it into like a Christian framework, and then they had all the Christian. It wasn't Christian pedagogy, but like a pedagogy to how you chaplaincy. And I know that chaplaincy is a bit different to teaching. But I just wanted to see, like, in your experience with training ministers or training teachers, is it actually helpful to like give out all that sort of, make all that pedagogy explicit, or is it just something that someone has to learn through practice?
There are different schools, there are different places that teach this stuff differently. It's not like there's a grand thing in the sky, and there's a lot of it that I think is shallow. But if you're looking for training in it, I know some really good places, and I know there's a lot of terrible ones.
Well, I can add to that, in the program I did was called Buddhist Ministry Initiative, funded by Whole Family Foundation that is based in Hong Kong. And they gave a lot of money to these Ivy universities, inviting Asian students to come and study theology. And I think my experience of it was that they weren't necessarily teaching anything new. They were asking us to ground ourselves in our own traditions.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. It wasn't like something, what I got from the course wasn't like new to me, but it was like putting a lot of frameworks around it.
Yeah, you had the freedom to choose other things like chaplaincy or anything, but of course practically when you approach a patient, we don't bring Buddhism to that conversation.
Right. Yeah, a lot of good chaplaincy is just good psychotherapy. And there's a lot of bad psychotherapy out there. It's good psychotherapy. It's, it's honoring. Delson.
Yeah, when did you talk about your new book and when is it coming out?
I think in 2 or 3 weeks I'll be ready to send it off to the editor, and we'll see what comes back from that. I still have a little hesitation about the title. I think high altitude meditation is a little obscure, but one of my old publishers said that, you know, the title is the one that has the flair, and then the subtitle does the heavy lifting. So the subtitle of this is Advanced Buddhist Practice. So it's what I'm really aiming towards. I want to share some stuff, unless there are other questions. As I was writing that book, one of the first things I was looking at were what are the motivations to get into meditation to start off with, and I gradually over time, looking at all of this, realized that there are probably 4 different ones, but they all evolve out of each other. And so I think the first thing that brings people into practice is really the desire, the urge to alleviate suffering. You know, and that seems to be number 1 on the Buddha's list. The difficulty with alleviating suffering is if you're not seeing clearly what the heck's going on there, you know, you're not going to be much help. So the second motivation that comes in is to see clearly. And I think the Buddha's meditation, particularly as we practice the here stuff, that's right, the central piece to it, is how do you train the mind to see clearly what's going on. And as you see clearly what's going on, what at least happened to me was that I realized seeing clearly, while it's very, very important, there's something that's even more important than that, which is seeing how you relate to what you experience, or how I'm related to myself and other things. And I think this is, I've found this to be really, really helpful, because particularly, you know, when you come into stuff fluttering around in your mind, just watch how you are relating to that. And you can have very good practice that is like, I'm going to play it cool and wait for that damn thing to get out of there. And that's not really healthy enough, or, you know, to go really deeply. And so what I ended up doing with all that is I put together another one. I call them attuning practices. So we're all familiar with the mind settling down and then something coming in and carrying it off and bring the 6 R's in. And so the 6 R's is like an attuning device. It's sort of what you do when things go off the rails that come back. And the 6 R's are wonderful, and they're kind of bulky, right? And so I just assume most of the people here have experienced those just getting really clumsy at times. And so you need a second practice that's a little subtler. And when I first ran into this here when I was actively studying with Bonte, I went back to the text and treated the Four Noble Truths as if they were meditation instructions. And so, you know, the first Noble Truth says there is suffering, and the verb that goes with that is suffering is to be understood. Is to be understood.
Yeah.
It's not figured out, but it's to see how it operates. It's not trying to fix anything. So, so when the mind goes off, my first instructions to myself were turning towards. So this thing came up that was disturbing my meditation, and the first thing I do is bring my attention directly onto it. Because the Buddha is saying we need to understand what's going on, and if you're looking the other way, you're not going to understand it. And the second Noble Truth says that you know, suffering arises from tana, from tension. So in the meditation, that translated for me, at least for my own use, as turning towards and relaxing into. I started off with relax, but relax in English has a little bit of a grip to it. So it's really trying to soften that. And then the third noble truth is that Nirodha is to be realized. And that to me is kind of tricky to unpack. Because Nirodha, we all know, is a specific state, but I think it's a stand-in for equanimity. And realize was hard for me to get a hold of. But what I think is some of it's a problem in translation. And that what's really saying is make it real. So if there are wholesome states that are coming up, how do you make them real? Well, you soak them up. So you relax into and just savor them, and just savor them. And if wholesome qualities aren't coming up, then you just smile. And that practice held me for a long, long time. And then I got into this stuff with both the heart and duality. And so how do you deal with that? And so I started working with this other one, which was when a distraction comes up, is the first thing you want to do is welcome it. So this goes back to the how are we relating to it? Is just welcome it. And it was surprising to me how often I thought I was being wide open magnanimous, but I wasn't really very welcoming. You know? So you welcome it, and that was such a powerful one, it needed a repetition. So the first step is just to welcome it. The second one is just to let it be. Just to let it be. And then the third one started off as surrender into the expanse. There is so much about meditation practice that's pulling in. And to get beyond all that, it's really a matter of going out. It's really a matter of going out. And I'm convinced that, I always thought of anatta, non-self, was just kind of get yourself to disappear, until it goes away. It's like, you guys remember that old movie, The Incredible Shrinking Man? Did you see that? This guy got this dose of, I don't know, it was bug poison and radiation or something like that, and he started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And so through the movie, he's down in size and he's trying to fight off mice with needles and stuff. And at the very end of the movie, he just shrinks so small that he just disappears. Yikes! That was my first horror movie. But there is sometimes that sense. But I think the selflessness really comes from going the other way. You know, you let your sense of self expand out to include more and more and more and more and more until there's nothing that's not included in that sense of self. And that, well, I found it easier, but also it feels more comforting and soothing and really powerful, So let me pick up the strain. I'm going to run out of time here. First motivation in going to meditation is alleviating suffering. Second is seeing what is. And the third is seeing how we are relating to our sense of self in the world and everything else. If you would just look around the room here quietly at some point, you know, when your eyes fall on somebody, if you're paying attention, there will be a push or a pull or something that's unique, you know, to that person. And so these feeling tones are going on all the time, all the time. And it's not getting rid of them, it's just seeing what they are. It's just seeing what they are, so we can relax out of them. And then the fourth one is dependent origination. What happens is you see how we're relating to all this and everything that's out there. It just becomes more and more obvious that we are embedded in this interdependent web where everything affects everything else to a larger or smaller degree. And that's where the self disappears. It's not that it's not there anymore, it's just it's not separate from anything else. Does that make sense? Anybody want to argue with me about that?
Doesn't that, so it sounds like non-dualism.
Yes, it is non-dualism.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's the core of it. Which is why I don't think freedom, can come if you're stuck in dualistic states, because there's this push-pull.
It reminds me, I had a thought a long time ago of an ice cube melting into a cup of coffee. And just kind of becoming,
Yeah.
like letting go and becoming one with the coffee.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a sutta, I think it's in the Samhita Nikaya, where the Buddha recommends for next practice just expanding your awareness in all directions at all times, and then you just become sort of this
Yes.
open awareness in every direction as far as the horizon.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
exact thing.
Yeah. And there's the lump of salt to dissolving in the Ganges, which is one of my favorite images too. Anything more on that? Otherwise, I want to tell you a closing story.
Anything on your list?
Pardon?
Anything on your list would be fine.
Okay. Well, we got to the first number of items, but
I wanted to say something more about, do you think that Buddha taught non-dualism?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I trust that he was free, and I don't think there's any freedom in dualism.
Because it seems like our experience on this earth plane is conditioned by dualism. Even the Buddha said these practices are wholesome and will lead to a good destination.
Mm-hmm.
These practices are not wholesome and will lead to a bad destination. So, to me, that is dualism.
Well, I think you're, from my perspective, and you may be right, but that's taking it conceptually too far. It's taking it too far conceptually, because the Buddha was very clear that it wasn't a philosophy, it wasn't a theology, it was basically a phenomenology that he was teaching. And so you're looking at the phenomena, and as soon as you try to abstract out of that about then you get into dualism and etc.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of puzzled by that whole topic, I guess.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, I mean, this is a a traditional image that we all use. That's sort of like lying on the beach, at the end of of a lovely summer day, watching the sun go down, and there's no us and them. There's no us and them, me and someone else, me and the sun. It's just all blended together. And philosophically, you can say, well, the sun's there and I'm here, and this is does that. But that's not what the phenomena is.
Yeah. So to me, it's like penetrating conceit.
Yeah.
When conceit is no longer there, then you are with what's the experience?
Yeah, and I think conceit, the translation of it, what it's really talking about, conceit, is there's a sense of me.
Yeah.
That's really solid and separate.
So is that the source of dualism in your
Philosophically, you could call it that. This is hard for me to get to too, but I think it's where we have to go with this stuff, is what is the direct experience like? And you're really using that for the gauge. And then if you have difficulty, if we have another hour or two, I would just say, if you want to see something that I think is really penetrating about this, it's Ken Wilber's new book of Finding Radical Wholeness. And he talks a lot about all these separate developmental lines and how they, can blend together.
sounds complicated.
It is, if you know Ken Wilber, it's just, yes.
Is Wilbur awakened?
Pardon?
Is Ken awakened?
Next time I see him, I'll ask him. But
Please do, because sometimes, you have these intellectual ideas, scholarships and all that sort of thing, which are very enticing and complicated and great explanations and everything else, but...
I know what you're saying, and I believe you, and all I can say is that he feels authentic to me, but I'm not. I can't be the judge of that. I'm really not. But including him talking about aspects of practice that I hadn't fully understood, and it resonated. When he talked about it, it just made a whole lot of sense. It made a whole lot of stuff come together, and there was a bunch of things like that. But he is a far-out dude.
But I think we go through that with practice all the time as we continue to practice and study and experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we find something that we haven't resonated before. And it's like, oh, now I get it.
Yes. I had a lot of I get it. And there's a lot of those chapters I had to read over and over and over again until I could get through the layers of them. But I found it worth it. Did you have something, Dilson?
I just wanted to add to the conversation that Andrew was talking about, dualism and non-duality. About dualism and non-duality. I think one way to look at it is, in the suttas, we find both duality and non-duality. Which is to say, the initial practice is a dualistic practice. But as you get into these deeper experiences, and for me, everybody knows this by now, my favorite sutta is the Bhaya Sutta. That is pure non-duality, if you look at it. Because the instructions he's giving is basically saying, in the seeing, there's only the seen. In the hearing, there's only the heard. In the cognizing, there's only the cognized. And that's an experience of pure non-dualism, or at least a technique of practice to experience the cessation of suffering, where there's disappearance of anyone having an experience of suffering. So I think he gradually takes you from the dualistic, which is where everybody is starting off, and then at the very deeper end of the practice, and this is the problem with the words, duality and non-duality, I think, is non-duality, I'm sorry, I'm hijacking your time, but I gotta just,
You gotta do it.
But the non-dualism that we have now in modern terms, like Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta and these kinds of things, and there's teachers talking about it, it's very spiritually bypassing.
Spiritually what?
Bypassing.
Light?
Bypassing.
Bypassing.
Bypass.
And so the Buddha is not talking about that. The Buddha still is rooted in the realistic groundwork of actions have consequences. And so karma still means something. And if I do something wholesome, it uplifts my mind. If I do something unwholesome, it degrades my mind. So he, after having that experience of being in the non-dualistic aspect, is not spiritually bypassing. And I think that's the difference that we should see here, is we're getting to non-duality, but not in the modern terminology of
Right,
what that means.
right.
We're getting into a space where we let go of conceit, for example.
And ignorance.
And ignorance.
I know.
So,
I mean, that to me is what the Buddha was teaching,
yes.
is to penetrate ignorance and conceit and the sensuality. And so that's why I was a little curious of you bringing in those terms in the little written thing, and maybe you didn't, maybe it was David, about struggling with duality for 50 years. I wondered, well, what is the definition there?
Yeah, no, I have been back and
That's
forth.
why I bring
So
up that
I-
question.
So I need to check with you. We're up at the end of my time. I've got one story I would like to end with.
Oh, yeah.
Can I land this on something that we can agree on? The non-duality is where there's no lobha, doha, or moha.
Yeah, that's the
That
technical.
will be the non-dual state, and that will be where what you're talking about, right? Where there's only within the scene, there's only the scene. There is no created illusion, therefore no duality. Is that right?
Yes,
That's the non-dual state.
Yes, and I would go one step beyond that to say experientially, what it is when you experience two things that logically contradict each other but don't feel like there's a struggle between them. That's
My question will be, is this when we talk about Anidasana Vijnana?
Yes. Well, you should talk about this. Why not? If you are comfortable with.
I didn't hear the.
Anidasana Vijnana.
Anidasana Vijnana. It would be this non-dualistic state.
Consciousness without surface, non-reflective consciousness.
Oh, wow.
Do I want to spend the time on this, or?
Tell your
Why we're
story.
here.
Tell it. Okay. You want to tell a story? Okay. God, I think it's so great when you don't tie up a talk at the end. I mean, really, because what you're raising is the one to meditate on. I mean, really.
We could talk about that more outside if you want.
Yeah.
Break off into groups.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I was sitting with my mother. in the bedroom of a country hospital, and there was outside the window there was long grass was blowing in the wind and trees and stuff. It was this little hospital. It was about maybe 10 minutes away from where we were. But I was gazing at my mother, who was stretched out and unconscious on this couch, on this bed, with her upper torso raised slightly. One of my brothers, Roger, my youngest brother, was sitting on the other side of the bed, down by her feet. And her breathing was so shallow that I couldn't even detect it. And I looked up at her temple, and she had lost a lot of weight. She had stomach cancer. And so she was really, and I could see the pulse there. And so I was watching the pulse, and something changed. And I really can't say what it was that was changed, but one moment I was looking at my mother, and the next moment I was looking at a corpse. And it looked, visually, it was exactly the same. And I couldn't tell what it was. And so I looked back up at her temple again, and the pulse was still going. And then it stopped. And then it started up again. And then it stopped. And after the longest time, it must have been a minute and a half, it started up again. And then it stopped. And that was it. I never started up again. And so I stood up and I went around to the other side of the bed, and my brother and I hugged. And then I went back and sat down, and my brother looked at me kind of confused and said, well, you know, what do we do now? And I shrugged, and it wasn't out of indifference, but I had never watched my mother die before. And I didn't know what to do, and so I thought, you know, I'm just going to sit, you know, here for a little bit. And then the nurse came in and picked up her hand to take the pulse. And I looked at her and I said, she's gone. And the nurse, it wasn't like she froze, but she just got very still and just was staring straight at me, and her eyes started to fill with moisture. And she said, I'll leave you with her and I'll go tell the doctor. And she walked out, and I thought, bless you, bless you, bless you. And I was surprised at how ordinary that moment felt, and how ordinary the death seemed. And I thought, well, perhaps I expected a Viking boat to come rowing up the hallway of the cottage, and come into the room and pick her up and put her body on this and then row off to the horizon or something like that. Or if it wasn't that dramatic, at least a roll of thunder in the distance, or a birth of a grandchild or something. Or a literary award for one of her plays. But this didn't seem special at all. There was nothing special about it. And then the image arose in my mind of my mother walking along this path that she'd been walking for 63 years. And it didn't start, her path didn't start any place special. And it didn't end any place special, but at some point, you know, she came onto the path and she left. A few weeks later, at her memorial service, her older sister, my aunt, told me that my mom had been the valedictorian of her college class and top student. And I had never known that. I had never known that. She'd just been my mom. And apparently it never occurred to her that that was important enough to mention, that she was a valedictorian. And I pictured her walking up to the podium and receiving that award. That must have been a special moment. But was it really special? I mean, it was unique, but every moment is unique. But was it something special? And I realized quietly that I'd had this fundamental misunderstanding. You know, that I thought that life started in an extraordinary way and it ended in something really exceptional. And we may reach a place that seems special. But usually that doesn't happen. Usually it just stops. It just stops. The life force just evaporates. You know, even the Buddha didn't die in a special moment. He just was alive one moment and dead the next, just like my mom. And so I must confess that I used to think that spiritual practice would take me to some place special, some place that was, you know, extraordinary. I couldn't, and the meditation has certainly taken me to places that I could not imagine. But lack of imagination is nothing to brag about. So if my meditation gets more refined, it actually feels more and more ordinary. More simple, more comfortable, kind of more home-like. You know, the buzz just fades a little bit, and I'm left smiling for no discernible reason. And I think, how did I miss this before? How did I miss this before? So what about this moment? What about this moment right here? Can we welcome it? Can we just let it be as it is? Can we welcome it and those around us? And can we just expand and spread out until we feel a part of everything, and everything feels a part of us? And perhaps for you and I and for all of us here, that place is the same for all of us. There may be only one self, which is one everything. We may view it from a different angle, but essentially, we're the same. We're the same. Namaste.